9. The agonizing pain coursing through Norik Vizaren proved to be the first sign that he had not, after all, perished. That he could breathe also indicated immediately to him that he had not dropped into the sea, and that, therefore, he had struck the deck. Why he had not snapped his neck, nor broken several other bones, Norik could only suspect had to be the fault of Bardak's cursed armor. It had already saved him from the demonic behemoth. A simple short fall likely had been child's play to it. Yet in his heart, the veteran soldier half wished that it had failed. At least then he would have been rid of the nightmares, the horrors. Norik opened his eyes to see that he lay in his cabin. Outside, the storm raged unceasingly. Only 2 forces could have dragged him back in here, one being the suit. Yet after what it had done to the tentacled monstrosity, it had seemed weaker, unable to perform any feat. Norik himself felt so drained, he marveled that he could even move. The weakness felt so odd that the weary soldier wondered if either the armor or the beast had somehow sucked part of his life from him. At that moment, the door swung open. Captain Casco hobbling into the tiny cabin with a covered bowl in his hand. A scent that Norik found both enticing and repulsive drifted from the bowl.
Awake? Good. No waste of food.
Without waiting for the soldier to rise, the cadaverous mariner handed him the bowl. Norik managed to right himself enough to eat. "Thank you." In return, the captain merely grunted.
How long have I been out?
Casco considered the question for a time, possibly wanting to make certain that he understood it.
Day? Little more.
How's the ship?
Did the creature damage it much?
Again a pause.
Ship always damaged, but can still sail, yes.
How can we possibly sail in a storm with no crew at all? The captain scowled. Norik suspected that he had finally asked the question for which Casco had no good answer. Of course, they could not sail without a crew. Likely the Hawksfire went around and around, tossed in random directions by the winds and waves. They might have survived the attack by the monster, but that did not mean that they would reach Lut Gholein. The monster. Norik's memory of what happened seemed so outrageous that he finally had to ask Casco if what he had seen had been truth. The captain shrugged.
Saw you fall? Saw the sea witch fall?
The foreign mariner had evidently decided that what he had confronted had been the legendary behemoth mentioned by so many sailors. Norik believed different, certain after his encounters with the imps and the winged creature at the inn that this had been yet another demonic force, but not one this time summoned by the enchanted armor. Legend spoke of Bardak's rise to dark glory, first as a pawn of hellish powers, then as a sorcerer both respected and feared by them, and how he had led a legion of demons in his quest to overwhelm all else. No one, though, ever spoke of how the greater demons might have felt about that usurping of their power. Had they now noted the armor's escape from the tomb, and so feared that the ghost of Bardak sought to re-establish his hold over their kind? His head pounded at such outlandish thoughts. Best he concerned himself with his own situation. If the Hawksfire remained unmanned, it would continue to meander over the twin seas, either sailing on long past the deaths of the only 2 aboard, or finally sinking due to some aspect of the endless storm.
I'm no seaman,
he commented to Casco between bites of food.
But show me what I can do and I'll help. We've got to get the ship back on course.
Now Casco snorted.
Done enough. What more? What more?
His attitude not only struck Norik as peculiar, but it also stirred the fighter's own ire. He knew that much of this situation could be blamed on him, or rather, the armor, but his offer to help the captain had been an honest one. Norik doubted that the suit would prevent him from helping. After all, it had been the one that had truly wanted to reach Lut Gholein, not him.
Listen, we'll die if we don't get the Hawksfire under control. If the storm doesn't take us, then we'll either eventually starve when the supplies go bad, or, more likely, strike some rocks and sink like a stone. Is that what you want for your ship?
The gaunt figure shook his head.
Fool! Fall cracked skull!
He had the audacity to seize Norik by the arm.
Come! Come!
Putting aside the nearly empty bowl, he followed Casco out into the storm. His legs took a few steps to again get used to the rocking of the ship, but the captain waited for him to catch up. Casco seemed caught between hatred, respect, and fear when it came to his passenger. He did not offer any assistance, but neither did he try to force Norik along faster than the weakened man could go. Reaching the open deck, the mariner let Norik move past him. The veteran fighter held tight to what handrail remained, peering through the heavy rain and trying to see what it had been that Casco sought to show him. All Norik could make out was the same empty scene he had confronted earlier. No sailors manned the ropes, no helmsman stood at the wheel. And yet, the wheel turned. Ropes no longer held it in place. Norik squinted, certain that the wheel should have been spinning wildly, yet it barely moved, sometimes turning one direction, then adjusting to the other, as if some invisible sailor kept it under control. A movement to the side caught his attention. Focusing, Norik at first had the horrible fear that one of the main lines had suddenly untied, only to have it re-loop itself before his very eyes, then tighten the new knot. And all around him, he began to notice subtle shifts, subtle changes. Ropes adjusted according to the needs of the sails. The sails themselves adjusted as necessary. The wheel continued to counter the churning waves, fixing the Hawksfire on a particular route, one that Norik expected would turn out to be almost directly west. No crew manned the vessel, but it seemed to the Hawksfire not to matter in the least. "What's going on?" he shouted at the captain. Casco only gave him a knowing glance. The armor. Again, its power astounded him. It had dealt with the gargantuan demon, and now it ensured that its own journey would continue regardless of the mutiny of the crew. The Hawksfire would reach port, one way or another. Norik stumbled away, heading not for his cabin, but down into the mess. Casco trailed behind, a captain with no purpose on this voyage. Both men shook off the rain. Casco dug into a chest, pulled out a dusty bottle whose contents he did not offer to his companion. Norik thought of asking for a drink. He certainly needed one, but thought better of it. His head pounded enough at the moment, and he preferred to try to let it clear. "How long until we reach port?" he finally asked. Casco put down the bottle just long enough to answer him. 3, 4 days, maybe." Norik grimaced. He had hoped for less than that. 3 or 4 more days aboard a vessel where wheels and ropes moved by themselves, and his only companion remained a wild-looking captain who thought him a devil in human form. He rose. "I'll be in my cabin until it's time to eat." Casco made no move to stop him, the lanky mariner quite content to be alone with his bottle. Stepping out into the storm, Norik battled his way back to the tiny cabin. He would have preferred to stay in the much more spacious, not to mention drier, area below deck, but in Casco's presence, the guilt over the troubles Norik's being here had caused the man ate at the soldier. It amazed him that Casco had not just slit his throat when he had come across the unconscious figure. Of course, after seeing what Norik had supposedly done, then discovering that even the fall had not killed his unsettling passenger, the captain likely had suspected that any attempt to slay the stranger would end up with Casco, the dead party. He would have probably not been far from wrong. The rain continued to not only soak Norik, but tried to beat him to the deck. In all his years fighting for one master or another, the veteran had faced harsh weather of all sorts, including blizzards. However, to him this storm had no equal, and he could only pray that it would at last end when the Hawksfire reached Lutgolane's port. That assumed, of course, that the ship would reach the port. The intense rain kept visibility limited. Not that there had ever been much to see, either aboard ship or among the waves beyond. Nevertheless, Norik had to continually blink away moisture, just to see a few yards ahead of him. Never had the cabin seemed so far away as it did this moment. The heaviness of the armor did not help either. the metal plate seeming twice its normal weight. Still, at least Norik did not have to worry about rust settling in. The enchantments cast by Bartik had clearly kept the suit as new as the day the Demon Master had first donned it. Not for the first time, Norik stumbled. Cursing the weather, he straightened, then wiped his eyes clear again so that he could see just how far away the door to his quarters remained. A murky figure stared back at him from the aft section of the walkway. "Casco," he called out, realizing only afterward that the captain could not have possibly rushed all the way to the stern, not with his bad leg. More to the point, this figure stood taller than the mariner and wore a broad-shouldered cloak, reminiscent of a Viserai sorcerer. Reminiscent of Faustin's cloak. He took a step forward, trying to see better. The figure seemed half-mist, and Norik wondered if what stood before him could be only the result of his own tortured, weary mind. "Faustin? Faustin?" The shadow did not answer. Norik pushed another step forward, and the hair on the back of his neck suddenly stiffened. He whirled around. A second, somewhat shorter figure near the bow drifted in and out of sight, his wiry form hinting of an acrobat, or more likely, a thief. What looked to be a travel cloak fluttered in the wind, enshrouding and obscuring most of the second figure's detail, but Norik imagined a dead, still grinning face, the head cocked slightly to the side, because the neck had been broken. "Satan," he blurted. His hands suddenly tingled. Norik glanced down, barely catching a slight red aura about them. A bolt of lightning struck so near that it lit up the entire ship, so near, in fact, that the stunned fighter almost swore that it touched the Hawksfire, yet did not damage it in any way. For a moment, the blinding brilliance surrounded Norik, making him even briefly forget the two specters. His eyesight finally returned to normal. Blinking, Norik glanced toward both the bow and stern, and saw no sign whatsoever of either of the dire shades. "Satan! Trist!" the frantic fighter shouted. Turning back to the stern, he yelled, "Faustin!" Only the storm answered him, rumbling with renewed fury. Unwilling to give up yet, Norik headed back toward the bow, shouting Satan's name over and over. He made his way across the open deck, scanning every direction. Why he desired to confront either of his two dead comrades, even Norik Viseran could not actually say. To try to apologize? To explain? How could he do that when, even knowing that it had been the armor that had claimed their lives, the former mercenary still blamed himself for not having heeded Faustin a few precious seconds earlier? Had he done so, he would not be where he was now. Had he done so, neither of his friends would be dead. "Trist! Damn you! If you're real, if you're there, come to me! I'm sorry! I'm sorry!" A hand fell upon his shoulder. "Who you call?" demanded Casco. "What you call now?" Even in the darkness and the rain, Norik could see the fear rising in the captain's watery eyes. To Casco, either his passenger had gone completely mad, or, more likely, Norik planned to summon yet new demons. Neither choice obviously thrilled the mariner. "No one. Nothing. No more demons." "No more. None." He pushed past Captain Casco, wanting nothing more than rest, but no longer interested in his cabin. Looking back at the perplexed and frustrated sailor, Norik asked, "Are there bunks for the crew below?" Casco nodded glumly. Likely he slept in a cabin near those bunks, and did not like the direction of the question. Bad enough he had to share the ship with a summoner of hellish creatures, but now that same demon master planned to sleep nearby. No doubt Casco expected various monsters to go wandering around below deck if that happened. "I'll sleep in one of them." Not caring how the captain surely felt, Norik headed below deck. Perhaps the battle against the demonic behemoth had taken too much out of him, resurrecting his guilt over the deaths of his comrades. Perhaps he had imagined both of them. That seemed so very likely, just as it seemed likely that he had imagined Faustin on the dock in Gaiacoul. The mutilated bodies of his two friends still lay in the tomb, there to be found by the next eager treasure hunters. Yet, as he shook off the rain and headed in search of the bunks, a stray thought disturbed him. Norik stared at his gloved hands, flexed the fingers that, for the moment, obeyed his will. If he had imagined it all, if the shades of Faustin and Satan Trist had not confronted him out on deck, why had the gauntlets glowed, even if only for a moment? In the dead of night, the army of General Augustus Malevolent went on the move, entering the vast, terrible desert of Aranok. Many of the men did not look forward to this march, but they had been given an order and knew no other course of action but to obey. That some of them would surely perish before they reached their destination, assumed to be the lush prize of Lut Gholein, did not deter them in the least. Each hoped that he would be one of the fortunate survivors, one of those who would lay claim to some portion of the wealth of the Port Kingdom. At the head of the army rode the general himself, the helmet of Bartok worn proudly. A faint sphere of light, conjured by Galeona, floated just ahead of him, marking the path for his steed. That it might also identify him as the most desired target by ambushers did not bother Malevolent in the least. Clad in the ancient helmet and his own spell-enshrouded armor, the general sought to show the ranks that he feared nothing, and that nothing could defeat him. Galeona traveled beside her lover, outwardly indifferent to everything, but all the while quietly utilizing her sorcery in order to detect any possible threat to the column. Behind the witch came a covered wagon loaded with Malevolent's folded tent, the various personal items from within it, and, seeming almost as an afterthought, Galeona's wooden chest.
"At last, the armor will soon be within my grasp," the general murmured, staring ahead into the darkness. "I can already sense its nearness. With it, I shall be complete. With it, I shall command a host of demons."
Galeona considered, then dared ask, "Can you be certain that it'll do all this for you, my general? True, the helmet has enchantments, and the armor is said to be even more bespelled. But so far the helmet has left us all baffled. What if the armor acts much the same? I pray not, but the secrets of Bartok may demand more of us than we're able to—"
"No!" He snapped at her with such vehemence that his guards, situated just behind him, immediately drew their swords, perhaps thinking that the sorceress had sought to betray their leader. Augustus Malevolent signaled to them to resheath their weapons, then glared at Galeona. "It will not be so, my dear. I have seen the glorious visions brought forth by the helmet, the shade of Bartok surely calling to me to add to his victories. I have seen in each of those visions the power of the armor and helm combined. The spirit of the bloody warlord lives on in the suit, and it is his desire that I become the mortal bearer of his standard." He waved a hand at the desert. "Why else does the fool who wears it now come to me? He does so because it is destined. I will be Bartok's successor, I tell you." The witch cringed, taken aback by his outburst. "As you say, my general." Malevolent abruptly calmed, once more a self-satisfied smile across his face. "As I say. And after that, yes, Lut Gholein will be mine to take. This time I shall not fail." Galeona had ridden with the commander from Westmarch for some time, likely knew him better than any under his command. Yet in all that time, the only mention of Lut Gholein had been as an eventual target, one that Malevolent had dreamed of conquering. She had never heard him speak of it as a past defeat. "You've been there? Before?" With something akin to devotion, he gently adjusted the helmet, turning away from her and preventing the sphere from illuminating what of his expression the armor did not already hide. "Yes, and if not for my brother, it would have been mine for the taking. But this time, Vizjun will fall." "Vizjun?"
she blurted, her tone incredulous. Fortunately, General Malevolent paid her no mind. Attention concentrated on the darkened, shifting sands. Galeona did not repeat the name again, preferring to immediately drop, if not forget, the subject. Perhaps it had been a slip of the tongue, just as something else he had just said had to have been an innocent mistake. After all, the general had much on his mind, so very much. She knew that he had never been to the fabled Kejistani Temple City, had never yet been across the sea to that land. In addition, Augustus Malevolent had been an only child, and an unwanted bastard at that. Yet, someone else Galeona knew of had not only been to fabled Vizjun, but had sought to conquer it, to destroy it, only to be thwarted in the end by his own brother. Bartek. With a surreptitious glance, the witch studied the helmet, trying to divine its intentions. The visions that the Western commander had experienced had clearly been for his benefit alone. Even when she had secretly tried the artifact on, no such images had been shown her. Yet it appeared that the more Augustus wore it, the more he had trouble differentiating between his own life and that of the monstrous warlord. Did the helmet perform some sort of enchantment each time these incidents happened? Galeona casually touched a black jeweled ring on one of the fingers of her left hand, turning the gem in the direction of her lover's head. She mouthed 2 forbidden words, afterward cautiously glancing to see if the general had noticed her lips moving. He had not, nor did he now notice the invisible tendrils extending from that ring, tendrils that reached out to touch the helmet in various places. Only Galeona knew that they were there, seeking, probing, trying to detect whatever forces permeated the ancient armor. Perhaps, if she finally discovered how they affected the general, the witch could take the first step toward using those powerful enchantments for her own goals. Even some slight bit of new knowledge would go far toward extending her own abilities. A flash of crimson light flared from the helmet, illuminating for a stunned Galeona each of the magical tendrils rising from her ring. A surge of power coursed toward her with lightning speed, eating away at the tendrils and converging on her finger. Fearing for herself, the sorceress reached to pull the ring free. Only mortal, she moved too slow. The streams of crimson light devoured the last of the tendrils, then came together at the black jewel itself. The gemstone sizzled, turned molten in less than the blink of an eye. The liquefied stone dripped over her finger, burning at her skin, searing her flesh. Galeona managed to bite back a scream, transforming her reaction to the intense pain into a barely audible gasp. "Did you say something, my dear?" General Malevolent casually asked, his eyes never leaving the landscape. She managed to keep her voice calm and assured despite her suffering. "No, Augustus, just a slight cough, a bit of desert sand in my throat." "Yes, that's a risk here. Perhaps you should cover it with a veil." He said no more, either focused on his duties as commander or lost once more in Bartek's past. Galeona carefully looked around. No one had noticed the astounding display of powerful energies in conflict. Only she, with her magical senses, had been witness to both her failure and her punishment. Giving silent thanks for that bit of fortune at least, she cautiously investigated the damage. The ring had turned to slag, the rare and resilient gem a black, burning stain on her finger. The band she finally managed to remove, but the melted jewel left a permanent and painful ebony blot on her otherwise unmarred hand. The injury meant little to her overall. She had endured much worse for her craft. No, what bothered Galeona more concerned the helmet's violent reaction to her probing. None of her spells in the past had caused it to respond with such vehemence. It almost seemed as if something within the armor had awakened, something with distinct intentions of its own. It had always been her assumption that the ancient warlord had cast numerous enchantments of tremendous power on his armor, the better to aid him in battle. Such precautions would have made perfect sense. Yet what if she had only guessed a part of it? What if even those who had slain Bartok had not realized the full extent of his mastery of magic's demonic? Did enchantments alone possess the helm and plate, or had Galliona discovered more? Did Bartok himself seek to return from the dead?